Welcome, everyone, to Master Surveillant Mindset here on Northwest Digital News. We're going to have some conversation about the school shooting that took place down in Colorado. We'll go through some of the details first, but you guys are going to want to stick around for this because there is so much more to the story than what you're hearing about in our famous mainstream media. So, anyway, Darin Fredrickson, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here on Master Surveillant Mindset today. And Darin, let's kick this off talking a little bit about, first of all, the shooting took place on the original article that was written on this happened on May 7th. And it happened at STEM School Highlands Ranch was the name of the school. So here's a little bit of background for everybody who's interested in knowing is that it was the 20th anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting. Seems impossible that was that long ago, but the 20th anniversary of that. And this STEM school and many others in the area had actually completely closed. They joined hundreds of schools near Denver in closing temporarily amid security concerns around the anniversary of this date. Well, then they went on about their normal business, and Tuesday afternoon, after the schools had been closed for this period of time, the following Tuesday afternoon, STEM schools' worst fears were realized when 9 students were shot, 1 fatally, and 2 fellow students of the school being held as suspects. So we'll get into a little bit of the suspect background. But first, let's get into the one shooting death ends up being a hero student. This is the guy who leads the rush to take the guns away from the gunman. Darin, your thoughts on the actions of this young guy who sacrificed himself for his classmates?
Yeah, well, they teach run, hide, fight, and not necessarily in that order. But obviously, if you have an opportunity to run from an active shooter type situation, you want to run. They're kind of getting away from hide a little bit, just because hiding puts you in a vulnerable position where if the assailant finds you hiding, there's not a whole lot of options from that point other than trying to run. In this situation, and I want to step back real quick on anniversary dates. When I was in law enforcement, every month or every week we'd get reports, at least in the department I was in, we'd get anniversary date reports from Homeland Security saying, hey, on this date, this happened, this date, this happened. And you pay attention to anniversary dates because that's when individuals, terrorists, criminals, usually terrorist mindsets, will use anniversary dates to affect an attack. And like you mentioned, these schools here coming up to the 20th anniversary of the Columbine shooting, which I think happened on 4/20, they're on high alert. But in this situation, you can see if you have criminal intent, anniversary dates are, of course, important. It was important here because it's definitely not a coincidence that this happened less than it was about 2 weeks after the Columbine shooting. So the anniversary date was effective May 7th.
Yep.
So there's no doubt there's a coincidence there on when this attack took place. But what we do as a society is we put everything on high alert during anniversary times of criminal incidents or terrorist attacks, but then everything goes away and you kind of forget about it. Well, terrorists and criminals don't forget about that. This situation here where Kendrick Castillo, 18 years old, basically sacrificed himself. These 2 individuals, Derek Erickson, 18 years old, and then a Maya Elizabeth McKinney, who identifies as Alec, who's a 16-year-old, a minor, who's actually a female in transition to becoming a male. They entered the school. It's a K through 12 school. They're former or current students. I'm not sure if they were current or former, but they were able to get deep into the school because they are students. They entered the school, I believe, with 3 handguns and a rifle, or at least that's what the authorities found. But they definitely went into the school with 2 handguns, 2 assailants. The one individual, Derek Erickson, walked into a classroom and said, "Don't anybody move," or "Don't move." And that's when this Kendrick Castillo rushed the individual with the gun, and in the process was fatally wounded and died because he sacrificed himself. There's no doubt in my mind his actions saved a lot of students that day. But we all have to think when something like this happens, you don't freeze. Like he didn't freeze. At least it doesn't appear he froze because he took action, and that's what it is. Get off the X, right? Take
Mm-hmm.
action, do something. Don't freeze because you become a victim. He chose to fight, and he did get fatally wounded during that incident, but it also encouraged a whole bunch of students. I think there was numerous students that actually rushed and rushed this individual, rushed this shooter, and was able to prevent other students from getting killed. I believe there were, you said, 9 students that were injured. I think one of the other
yep,
students,
a total of 9. Yep.
yeah, I think one of the students that rushed, I believe one report I read said he was struck twice in the leg. And so the authorities are not releasing a lot of details on who was shot and names and all of that. But there are enough facts out there to see that this was another shooting at a school near an anniversary date, and involved 2 very troubled youngsters, if you want to call them that. And so kudos to Kentra Castillo. We should realize that he made the ultimate sacrifice as a student, taking action and saving other students.
Mm-hmm. And then, subsequently with his actions, gave courage to several other boys there in the student body who followed his lead and gang rushed these 2 kids with guns and took them out. There's something, though, that you mentioned in the beginning here, that terrorists don't forget about these anniversary dates. And so the date being April 20th, and then this particular shooting or incident takes place on May 7th. Well, when you're talking about a terrorist influence, what is not being talked about in the news, in fact, let me back up from that a little bit. What is being talked about in the news is that here's another reason why we need more gun control legislation and everything else that's involved in there. As if this would be a solution to this problem. Here, though, when you mentioned about terrorist influence, there is influence from a very lawless faction, which you could think of as terrorism, that's influencing these 2 boys' actions. And people go, what is it? Because we haven't heard about it in the news. Let's talk about that, because this is stuff that has to be discussed. And Kyle here, actually just doing some search and moving out of Google and over to Bing. That's a tip to our audiences that recognize how much sifting and sorting and bias is happening in our media today, and even in our search engines, Google being one of them. Found this article on Bing, and there's 2 of them. One from the Washington Examiner, the other from the Epoch Times. Bring that article up in the background here, Kyle. This talks about the father of the Colorado school shooting suspect is an illegal immigrant, and more importantly than that, a serial felon, deported multiple times from the United States. Number of violent convictions. This guy and his daughter wanting to be a son, they shouldn't even be here in the United States. When you're talking about illegal immigrants and crime happening as a result of people just like this, this is exactly the kind of people who should not be in this country.
Absolutely. And I think it was from 2010 to 2018 is where he showed violent tendencies. He did 15 years in a Colorado jail for menacing with a weapon, had been deported 3 times prior. And ICE said he travels regularly between Colorado and Mexico. This is a criminal. This is a felon, and he's got a kid. One story I read said the kid, his son or daughter, his child, and this Derek Erickson broke into Erickson's gun cabinet and retrieved the weapons that they then used at the school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Alec, the person identifying as Alec, would be on the right there, a minor. So they basically had a plan. They went and were able to obtain weapons, and they were able to get into a school, and they were able to wreak havoc. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the upbringing of Maya McKinney, otherwise known as Alec, like there's no doubt that there's going to be some influence from a parent who is a felon.
Yep.
And that shouldn't even be here. Like, has
And
been deported 3 times.
as you mentioned, all very recent activity relating to he's not a felon from 20 years ago. He's a
No,
felon from
no.
2010 to 2018.
Sure, and I
Yeah.
think the 16-year-old was born in 2003 or 2004, and the crimes we have on the father are pretty much centered between 2010 and 2018. This is current activity. So you look at this and you say, what's the solution? Oh, let's get rid of the guns. Let's do this. Let's do that. Whatever. Let's look at the core, the fundamental breakdown of why is this guy even here right now? Period. Because if
Yeah.
he was to go, maybe the son, the daughter would go with him as well too. I apologize. I don't know. I guess the Maya wants to be referred to as a pronoun he, but the fact is, like, she's in transition from he, so I don't know exactly what to call the suspect. But if he wasn't here, the child most likely probably would not be here because they would go back with their father. So this is let's look at the core fundamental breakdown of our system and look at that. Like you mentioned, you can't find, I looked at a lot of stories too, and I didn't find anything. Kudos to Kyle over there for finding this story, this little nugget on another search engine that you're not hearing about anywhere in the mainstream media. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Oh my gosh, can you imagine a school shooting that actually ties to illegal immigration and the breakdown of enforcing it? Let's not talk about that. No, let's just, talk about everything else about getting rid of guns. And so
this
is
could have
unfortunate.
been on MSNBC, CBS, CNN, just to name a few, or the New York Times, et cetera. Could have been in all these different places, but it ends up being on the Epoch Times and the Washington Examiner, which everybody would say those aren't some of your mainstream articles that people are commonly referring to. But yeah, that's where this story is at, you guys. And Kyle, if you would, also make sure that the link shows up here on the live stream for people who want to research this themselves. But yeah, this is Mr. Quintana that we're seeing here. Elvis Quintana, a Mexican national was deported several times, and a convicted felon with all recent history in violence involving firearms as well. So yeah, I don't think this kid born Maya and now wants to be referred to as Alec has any chance whatsoever to turn out to be a decent young person. And then, more indication, people can argue that it either is or it isn't, but it wasn't long ago that things like gender dysphoria and things related to transgenderism, that they were very closely associated with people with mental illness. And you look at a youngster who has this kind of influence behind them, and transgender mental issues to deal with as well. This is a person that any reasonable-minded person would say they're a little off kilter in a lot of different ways.
And just to show that the father was influence, I have this tweet here by Alec themselves. So this tweet basically shows that Alec was changing as a person mentally. It wasn't the same Alec that the mother knew, and also that Alec themselves missed their dad. So it wasn't just like, they were very attached to their father, so the father was a major influence in their life.
Yep. I miss my dad. Can you find him for me? Yeehaw, go get him. Yeah. Yeah. So this is like one of the sad truths that we have here in this country, is that the entirety of the information, the entirety of the story is not being shared anymore. And, this is one of the places that you actually can get an entire story from beginning to end, and we're more than happy to share it. More than happy to speak truthfully about what the situation is. And it doesn't really reflect well on the narrative that the mainstream media is trying to pull on this story, in saying that we need gun control legislation to stop this. But here's the interesting part. Not only do we know that there is an illegal immigrant with a felony history that's influencing this kid who's taking these actions, but when you look at gun control legislation and say, would gun laws prevent stuff like this from happening, if somebody gets caught, I'm just talking about the threshold. Somebody gets caught with having a gun that's not legally registered or properly registered. That is in many areas a crime within itself. If you go out and kill somebody, the charge for murder is way beyond the charge for holding a illegal firearm. So here's the irony of all of this is these people who push this gun control mantra want us to believe that the person who's willing to commit murder that has a penalty way up here will not break the law and not have an illegal firearm because we can pass laws to prevent this step from being taken. I'm going, they're willing to do this, and you say they're not going to do this? That's just, in what part of your psyche did you ever think that was, blows my mind.
Well, look at Mexico, because Arizona borders with Mexico. I'm very familiar with Mexico and the laws in Mexico. Look at their strict gun laws in their country. If you're an American, you bring even ammo into Mexico and get caught with ammo. It wasn't that many years ago where a veteran was going down on vacation, had ammo in his vehicle. He was put in a prison down there until the U.S. government was able to get him out. Look at how gun control is working in Mexico right now, where the cartels, violence is out of control. People have no way to protect themselves at all. Because they can't own guns, at least certain guns. And so that's just the epitome of how gun control, how it shows it does not work when you have the violence associated with it. And to your point, the law-abiding citizen that goes down there with a gun or with ammo, they're not the ones causing the problems. And so the cartels don't care about the gun laws. Why? They're shooting up law enforcement, judges, witnesses, victims, journalists, cartel members, bystanders in shootings. Like, do you think they really care about the laws about possessing a gun illegally? Absolutely not. That doesn't even cross their mind. So, yeah, that's...
So, something there to your point about these really strict gun laws they have in Mexico. For people who don't know, Mexico is broken up into 7 regions, and there's one gun store in each region. One gun store. So there's 7 gun stores that citizens could purchase a gun for. It's a very intensive process you have to go through to prove why you should even be able to have a gun. So per capita, legally owned guns in Mexico are 1/6 of what they are here in the United States. 1/6 per capita is what gun ownership is. And yet you are 5 times more likely to be shot in Mexico than you are here in the United States.
Oh, so, yeah, it's unbelievable. Oh, yep. It's tens of thousands of people have been dying in these drug wars in Mexico, and the gun laws have no impact at all.
So the takeaway from this story should be, first of all, gun restrictions and gun laws don't prevent crimes from happening. In fact, the exact opposite happens. That we just shared from Mexico. 1/6 of the gun ownership per capita, 5 times the crime. And so, yeah, there's these examples that exist all over this country, even in our urban areas where they have 20% gun ownership versus in the suburban and rural areas where there's 80% gun ownership. So this whole 80-20 rule actually really fits here in America too, because where the fewest number of guns are owned, that's where 80% of the crime actually happens. Gun crime happens here in the United States. And then to go back to the other takeaway from this should be, when our president and others are saying that these illegal thugs, as he has referred to them, need to be permanently kicked out of this country. This shooting situation that took place in this Colorado school, an illegal immigrant is the dad of one of these kids, a 3-time felon, shouldn't even be here in the United States. This should not have even happened. So
nope.
That's where the real actions are taken, is getting people like this out of our country, preventing people like this from coming into our country. And any gun control law wouldn't have stopped this man's influence on his son and from allowing this crime to happen. The real heroes in this whole thing is the kid who rushes the the gun-wielding suspects here, prevents them from killing anybody else other than him and the other boys that joined in on this gang rush to take the guns away from the shooters. Other people end up being wounded, but nobody else is killed. To great credit to these kids who said, I'm not going to stand on the X. We're going after this guy. And
Absolutely.
kudos to them for doing that.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Well, thanks to everybody who joined us here on Master Surveillant Mindset. I hope you share this story with everybody. Darin Fredrickson, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here on Master Surveillant Mindset. Thanks for joining us. This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text to 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgerson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.